She's my professor, and every time we're alone in her office, I feel a connection I shouldn't, but can't ignore. The first time I met her, the air in the room seemed to sharpen around me. It was late afternoon when I stepped into her office, the golden light spilling through the blinds painted stripes across the bookshelves, across the papers scattered on her desk, across her. She didn't look up right away. Her pen scratched against the page as I stood there, frozen for a moment, suddenly too aware of the sound of my own breathing. When she finally glanced up, her eyes caught mine with such directness that I almost forgot why I'd come. "Sit," she said, her tone calm but not unkind. I lowered myself into the chair opposite her desk, the wood cool against my palms as I gripped the arms. She set her pen down with deliberate care, folding her hands on the table. Her movements were precise, but not rushed, as though she wanted me to feel the weight of the moment. "I've looked over your first assignment," she said, sliding a paper toward me. Her fingers brushed the page, and I caught the faintest scent of her hand lotion. Lavender, maybe. "You're capable of better work. Much better." My heart thudded. There was no malice in her words, just quiet conviction, and somehow that made them hit harder. She leaned forward slightly, resting her forearms on the desk. "Show me how hard you've studied," she said, her voice dropping just enough to sound like a challenge, not a scolding. I swallowed, nodding, though my mind was suddenly blank. She waited, giving me space to respond, her gaze steady but not cold. I thought I had done well," I admitted, my voice softer than I intended. Her expression softened just slightly, not with pity, but with interest. "Good effort isn't the same as great work," she said. Then, after a pause, she added, "But I think you have it in you." Her words shouldn't have mattered so much, but they did. The room was quiet except for the faint ticking of the wall clock, and I felt a strange mixture of nerves and determination rising in me. She tapped the paper lightly with one finger. "Come back tomorrow. Bring me your best work. And this time—" She let the words hang there for a heartbeat longer than necessary. "Don't hold back." I nodded again, this time with more certainty. As I stood, my chair legs scraped softly against the floor. She didn't look away, and neither did I. When I left her office, the hallway felt colder, emptier, but I was carrying something new with me. Not just an assignment, but a challenge. And maybe, just maybe, a reason to rise to it. The next day, I returned to her office just before sunset. The hallway was quieter than usual, and the sound of my own footsteps felt too loud as I approached her door. She was already there, leaning against her desk, glasses perched low on her nose as she read through a stack of papers. When she saw me, a small, knowing smile touched her lips, not wide, not warm, but enough to make my chest feel tight. "You came back," she said, almost as if she hadn't been sure I would. "I said I would," I replied, setting my notebook down on her desk. She slid the glasses off and gestured to the chair. "Let's see what you've got." I sat, handing over my notes. She flipped through them carefully, her brow furrowing, not with disapproval but focus. The room was filled with the quiet rustle of paper and the faint hum of the air conditioner. "This is better," she said finally, tapping a line of text with her pen. "But you still hesitate here. Why?" I leaned forward, following her finger. "I wasn't sure if that argument would hold." Her eyes flicked to mine. "Then defend it. Don't just write it, believe it." There was something about the way she said it, firm but encouraging, that made me sit a little straighter. She noticed, I think, because the corner of her mouth lifted almost imperceptibly. She moved around the desk then, standing just over my shoulder. I could feel the warmth of her presence before she even touched the page. When she pointed at a sentence, her hand brushed the back of mine, light as air, but enough to make my pulse quicken. "See this?" she said, her voice closer now. "It's strong. Let it breathe. Don't bury it in qualifiers." I nodded, scribbling a note. Her perfume, something faintly floral, seemed to settle around me. It was distracting in a way I didn't want to admit. For the next hour, we worked through the paper line by line. Sometimes she stood beside me, Sometimes she sat across from me, her elbows on the desk, chin resting on her hand as she listened. Every now and then, her hand would rest briefly on my shoulder when I got something right, the weight of it strangely grounding. By the time we finished, the sun had dipped below the horizon. The office felt warmer, quieter, as though the whole building had gone still. "You're improving," she said finally, closing my notebook with a soft thud. "But we're not done yet." I met her eyes, and for a moment neither of us moved. Then she smiled, just slightly, and said, "Same time tomorrow?" I nodded. "Same time." When I stepped back into the hallway, I realized my heart was beating faster than it should have been. And not just because of the work. The following week, our sessions had become routine, a quiet rhythm I found myself looking forward to more than I should have. That evening, the building was nearly empty. The glow from her desk lamp cast the room in a soft amber light, and the faint sound of rain tapping against the window gave everything a hushed, private feeling. She was sitting at her desk when I came in, hair loosely pinned up, a few strands falling around her face in a way that made her look softer somehow. "You're early," she said, glancing up from her notebook. "Couldn't focus at home," I admitted. "Figured I'd just come here." Her lips curved into a small smile, but there was something thoughtful behind her eyes. She gestured toward the chair across from her. "Then sit. I suppose we both could use the company tonight." We worked for a while, the only sounds the scratching of my pen and the quiet turn of pages. At some point, she stopped me mid-sentence, leaning back in her chair. "You always overthink," she said gently. "Not just in your writing, in everything." I paused, pen hovering above the page. "You can tell that from a paper?" Her expression softened. "I can tell that from you." Something in my chest tightened. I set my pen down, suddenly feeling exposed. "I just don't want to fail." Her gaze held mine, steady and warm. "Failure isn't the worst thing that can happen," she said quietly. "Trust me, I've failed at plenty. It's how you carry it that matters." She hesitated then, as though debating whether to say more. Finally, she looked away, her fingers absently tracing the edge of a book on her desk. "When I was your age, I turned down a fellowship abroad because I was afraid of leaving home," she said softly. "I told myself it wasn't the right time. I've spent years wondering what would have happened if I'd been braver." The room was quiet, just the sound of rain filling the space between us. She didn't look at me as she said it, but I could feel the vulnerability in her voice, a rare glimpse beneath her usual composure. Without thinking, I reached out, my fingers brushing the back of her hand where it rested on the desk. She glanced down at the touch, then back up at me. For a long moment neither of us spoke. Her hand didn't move away, but she didn't grip mine either. It was just there, warm beneath my fingertips, grounding me. "You won't make the same mistake," she said finally, her voice softer now. I nodded, the words sticking in my throat. The rain outside had turned into a steady downpour by the time I gathered my things. But when I left her office that night, I felt strangely lighter, as though I'd shared something I hadn't known I'd been carrying. The next evening, the rain had cleared, leaving the air cool and crisp. Her office window was cracked open, letting in the faint smell of wet pavement and the distant sound of cicadas. She was already at the desk when I came in, sleeves rolled to her elbows, hair pinned up in a neater twist than usual. A pair of reading glasses rested low on her nose as she scribbled notes on the margin of a student's paper. "You're getting predictable," she teased lightly without looking up. "Predictable?" I set my bag down, pulling the chair closer. "You always come 5 minutes early now." Her mouth curved in the smallest of smiles before she returned to her notes. "Not that I mind." Something about the way she said it made the room feel warmer. We got to work quickly. She was in a focused mood, her voice low and steady as we went over my paper. At one point she rose from her chair and came around to stand behind me, leaning over my shoulder to correct a sentence. "Here," she murmured, reaching past me to tap the page with her pen. The brush of her sleeve against my arm sent a subtle shiver down my spine. Her face was close enough now that I could feel the warmth of her breath as she explained the correction. I tried to focus on her words, but every detail, the faint scent of her perfume, the soft whisper of her hair near my cheek, pulled me out of the moment. "You're quiet," she said finally, noticing my pause. I managed a small, nervous laugh. "Just concentrating." Her gaze lingered on me for a beat longer than necessary, as though she wasn't quite convinced, before she straightened. The warmth of her presence left with her, and I found myself missing it instantly. Later, when we reached a particularly difficult section of the paper, she pulled her chair next to mine instead of across the desk. Our knees brushed as she leaned closer, pointing at a line with the tip of her pen. "This part," she said, glancing up at me, "is where your argument comes alive." Her eyes caught mine, and for a moment the world outside the office felt very far away. The ticking clock, the faint hum of the air conditioner, everything seemed quieter, as if waiting for one of us to speak. I nodded slowly, though I wasn't sure I'd heard her question. She leaned back slightly then, a faint smile tugging at her lips as though she knew exactly what was going through my head. "You're improving," she said softly. When we finished for the night, she gathered the papers into a neat stack and handed them to me, her fingers brushing mine in the exchange. The touch was brief, almost accidental, but it lingered all the way down the hallway as I left. By the following week, something unspoken had shifted between us. I noticed it the moment I walked in, the way her eyes lingered on me a fraction longer, the quiet pause before she spoke, as though she was measuring her words more carefully than before. "Close the door," she said softly. I did, and the click of it shutting seemed to seal us off from the rest of the world. She gestured for me to sit, but didn't immediately move back to her own chair. Instead, she leaned against the desk, arms folded loosely, watching me with a thoughtful expression. "You've been working hard," she said finally. "It shows." "Thanks," I said a little too quickly. Her gaze softened, but she didn't look away. "I mean it. Most students just do enough to get by. You don't." I looked down at my notebook, suddenly finding it hard to meet her eyes. "I guess I just don't want to disappoint you." The admission hung in the air longer than I intended. Something in her face changed, not quite a smile, not quite sadness. She came around to sit across from me, her hand resting lightly on the desk. "You won't," she said, her voice quieter now. "But you have to remember this is just one part of your life. Don't let my expectations weigh more than they should." Her words were gentle, but they struck something deeper in me. I wanted to tell her that it wasn't just about the work anymore, that somewhere between late nights and quiet talks, she had become the reason I wanted to do better. But I stayed silent. We worked through the paper, but the usual easy rhythm was missing. Every time our hands brushed as we reached for the same pen, or when she leaned close to point out a line, there was a faint hesitation, as if both of us were aware of something neither dared name. At one point, she paused over a paragraph, her finger tracing a line slowly before she looked up. "This is strong," she said softly. "Really strong." Our eyes met, and for a long moment neither of us spoke. My chest felt tight, like something important was balanced on the edge of that silence. She was the one to break it, sitting back and drawing in a quiet breath. "You should be proud of this," she said, her tone carefully neutral again. When our session ended, she walked me to the door. Just before I stepped out, her hand brushed my arm, light, quick, but deliberate. "Same time tomorrow?" she asked. I nodded, feeling the faint warmth of her touch linger as I left. Walking down the empty hallway, I couldn't tell whether what I felt was anticipation or fear. Maybe both. I arrived early again, but this time she was already waiting. Her office light spilled into the hallway, soft and golden against the darkening evening. She was standing by the window when I came in, arms crossed, staring out at the campus lawn below. "You're quiet tonight," I said gently as I set my bag down. She turned, and for a moment I saw something unguarded in her expression. Tiredness, maybe, or something heavier. "Long day," she admitted, gesturing toward the chair. "But I suppose you've had one too." I sat, but she didn't immediately take her usual place across from me. Instead, she perched on the edge of the desk, close enough that I could see the faint crease between her brows. "I read your latest paper," she said, holding it up. "It's excellent. The best work you've done yet." I exhaled slowly, relief washing over me. "I was nervous about this one." She smiled faintly. "You didn't need to be." The silence stretched between us. For once, it didn't feel awkward, just full, like there were too many things either of us could say. "You've changed," she said finally. I blinked. "Changed? You carry yourself differently now," she said. "There's more confidence in your work, and in you." Her words hit harder than I expected. I looked down, running a thumb along the edge of my notebook. "Maybe that's because of you." Her breath caught just slightly. When I looked up, her eyes were fixed on me, serious now. "This, whatever this is," she hesitated, searching for the right words. "It matters that we keep it appropriate." I nodded, my throat suddenly dry. "I know." But neither of us moved. The clock ticked softly in the background, and I felt a strange calm settle over me, like the storm that had been building between us was finally breaking. "I don't want to lose this," I said quietly. Something in her expression softened. She reached out then, her hand covering mine where it rested on the desk. The touch was warm, steady, her thumb brushing once over the back of my hand as if to reassure me. "You won't," she said, just as quietly. We sat like that for a long moment, no rush, no words, just the sound of our breathing and the distant hum of the building. Her hand stayed on mine until she finally let go, slowly, as though reluctant to break the moment. "Same time tomorrow?" she asked, her tone softer now, almost tentative. I smiled, feeling something inside me settle. "Yeah. Same time." When I stepped into the hallway, my heart felt lighter than it had in weeks. Whatever this was between us, it wasn't over. The next afternoon, the campus was bathed in soft autumn light. Leaves skittered along the path as I made my way to her office, feeling more at peace than I had in weeks. Whatever had shifted between us last night, it hadn't frightened me, it had steadied me. When I arrived, her office door was already open. She was at her desk, stacking a few books into neat piles. The usual tension that hovered between us seemed different today, quieter, warmer, almost as though we'd both silently agreed not to keep dancing around it. "You're smiling," she said without looking up. I hadn't even realized I was. "Guess I'm in a good mood." She glanced at me then, and a faint, amused curve touched her lips. "I think I like this version of you better." We spent the next hour going over a final round of revisions, but the work felt lighter, easier. She praised my arguments, occasionally teasing me about how far I'd come since our first meeting. Every so often, her hand would brush mine as we traded pages, and neither of us pulled away as quickly as we used to. When we finished, she set the last paper aside and leaned back in her chair with a quiet sigh. "Well," she said, "I think you've proven yourself. Finally?" I grinned, but there was a note of sincerity in my voice. She nodded, smiling softly. "Finally." For a moment neither of us moved. The late afternoon light slanted through the blinds, striping the desk between us. She reached out then, slowly, and let her hand rest on mine. "You've done good work," she said gently. "But more than that, you've grown." Her thumb brushed lightly across the back of my hand. The touch was simple, unhurried, but it held more meaning than any words could have. "I had a good teacher," I said quietly. Something softened in her expression then, a look that was both proud and just a little vulnerable. She stood, and I did too. When she stepped closer, she placed a hand lightly on my shoulder, her gaze meeting mine for a long, quiet beat. Then she leaned in and pressed a brief, gentle kiss to my cheek, not rushed, not hesitant, just sure. "Go do something good with what you've learned," she said softly. I nodded, my throat too tight to answer right away. When I left her office, the sun was low, painting the hallway in gold. My chest felt warm, steady. Whatever we were, student and teacher, mentor and mentee, Something more just beginning. It no longer felt like something I had to run from. As I stepped outside into the crisp air, I realized I wasn't just smiling. I was ready for whatever came next.